Somebody asked, so if you had a chance to look yet at the February webinar and some of the other work that I've offered on how to work with whites to increase our capacity to partner with people of color, follow the leadership of folk of color, notice our racist attitudes, behaviors. Again, it's very advanced work for whites that you might want to do in accountability, white affinity spaces. And if you're doing work on racism, there are ways to infuse this in if you have mixed groups. And so they asked about the article, which I love, by Tema Okun and some of her colleagues at Change. I've lost the whole, but if you just type white supremacy culture, Tema, T-E-M-A Okun, and my guess is Malia is working now to get a link, because you've been doing that all along, so that would be helpful if you could. And what I love about it is it's maybe 3 paragraphs of 13. So urgency, sense of urgency. Here's what sense of urgency looks like in the organization that's not useful, and then antidotes, which are other ways of being. And they have 13 of these. So having people pre-read this can be useful if they are ready for it. So I would not do this. Thank you, Malia, for putting that in. I would not do that in a foundational workshop. I use this with folks that want much more advanced work just on race and racism. And if I only have a day, I might do it towards the end of the day after we've done microaggressions, gallery, talking about policies and practices that perpetuate microaggressions and perpetuate white culture and ways of being. And then I would introduce, I might have done already white privilege, kind of a move-in circle of what is white privilege. And then I might, if they haven't done as a pre-read, then I might have them read it. I'll bet it's a 10-minute read, easy. Or I might have them read half, and small group, half read the first half and the other half read the second half. And I would always give, whether pre-read or in the moment, some questions, because you want to anticipate the resistance. The resistance, again, if you go to path to competence, if folks are in denial or even in the box of fear, more than likely you'll get resistance like, what's wrong with some white culture? It's good. And so I just anticipate it by saying, as you read this article, choose a couple. And what are times that attention to time is useful? Or comfort, attention to people's comfort is useful. And when do those actually get in our way of becoming an inclusive, high-performing team organization that really promotes social justice, racial justice? And so you're inviting them to do, again, that both and. When is it useful? When does it get in the way? And Malia in the chat has put in even some other connected sites to dismantling racism and white supremacy. So thank you again. Because white culture isn't necessarily bad, parts of it. It's when people who set up the organization and leaders say this is the only way, the right way to be. Professional looks like this, kind of white cultural. No emotion, in your head, impersonal, no conflict, don't make the leaders uncomfortable. So if that's the way that's enforced, and anybody with a different way of being, many folk of color and some white folk want to have a different way of engaging, and they are pushed out to the outside, punished, not moved up, actually maybe let go if they're trying to have a different way of being. And so I like groups to talk about, when are these useful? When is it not? And what are other ways of being, and when could those be useful? And that in and of itself could be a several session, because this is pretty significant conceptual understanding. So you might start and then come back in a couple of weeks with some homework in between. After the individual reading, I'd put people into small groups to share. You might do a stations where you have these different ones up. And again, 13 can be overwhelming, but if you have 100 people, could do it. But a small group, you may want to say, what are 4 you want to do? 1 on each piece of newsprint, line down the middle. When could this be useful at times? When does it get in our way of creating inclusion and equity and social justice? And they can be in groups of 4 and 5, discuss, chart, and then move to the next one, and then come back as a large group. So that could be something. I like then moving to, again, another time you come back together to, so what and how, when and how are these in our organization? So you have to teach them at first. And then maybe the time in between is come back with examples, whether it's stated officially or in our unwritten ways of being, our norms and the ways that we engage, even if it's in pockets. Where have you seen some of these dynamics of white culture play out? Is it in our hiring practices, our performance management, how we onboard people? And again, it could be what we have in writing looks pretty good, but as you get into the different units, cultures could be perpetuated there because we haven't been able to shift those yet. And again, ask, what is our current practice and culture? Why do you think it got created? Is it ever useful? When is it problematic? And what else could be another way of doing it? And that's very advanced, masterful facilitation, because lots of conflict is going to come up. And there are going to be people that want to hold on to the old way because it works for them and maybe not want to move to more of a collaborative, participatory, shared leadership, open, transparent. I have just one or two people in leadership. They're like, but somebody has to make the decision. I say, well, how can we get all people participating in the decision, or at least the chance to participate? And for some folks like me who grew up very top down, once you're a leader, you get to be in charge. Dynamics have been shifting for decades, but particularly I think the generations coming into the work environment, into our high schools, want a very different type of leader and manager. And so there's a real culture clash across generations and across race, class. So there's a lot of work to do. So you raise great questions. How are we training the folks that interact with funders, donors? Because some people listening might be seeing the parallel. If you're at a university, K-12, or any other type of nonprofit too, your funding is really dependent often on donors. And so how do you prepare people who are working with donors, building that relationship, to realize what culture clash could be happening? What types of microaggressions, macroaggressions might they experience as they're at events or one-on-one or visiting the family? If people are visiting the foundation, there could be all kinds of things on the wall, as well as interactions that are just so dominant privileged culture, white supremacy, as well as upper class culture. And so how do we prepare the folks that are from our organizations interacting so they're aware, they know we have their back if they engage and confront, but also maybe some strategies to maneuver within with integrity, but maneuver within so that we get access to the resources to serve those we're trying to serve. And I mean, those are hard conversations, but I'm not sure organizations prepare people for the huge culture clash that's going to happen. So I love that point you made. And then the strategy, here it is, new thought. This is probably what you're saying, that if this is what you get as you work with funders or a partner organization, it may not be funders, maybe you're working with the city government, you're partnering with another nonprofit that is very steeped in dominant culture. If this is their culture and you have to work with them, or we're choosing to work with them for the greater good, what are some strategies? They may not want the antidotes, but what can you do to counter this perfectionism, top down, one way is the right way? What strategy can you do to maneuver within those systems? So, great points. And I loved your point in the chat of part of your working with people teaching this, helping them realize how often they do the white culture, even if it's useful, but how often you do other ways of being, and kind of a scorecard. And always checking back with the group. How's our balance between focus on time and like we have to get this done task, and open space for creativity and lots of ideas and input? How's our balance between quick decisions and giving enough time for people to go do research or do some focus groups and come back with alternative ideas? So, and then how often, 3 times a year at least, are you doing a mini retreat, if not a full day retreat, to say, how are we doing in our interactions, in our culture, our climate, how we make decisions, how we communicate, to just readjust that balance? Because my guess is the more you are open to shifting the climate and culture, and you really do, that some folks are still sitting back thinking, is this really for sure, or is it just for show? And so as you continue to ask the question, how is this balance, and what other needs are unmet? Or are we doing too much white culture? Is there another way we need to be? I think more and more people will speak up and say, actually, there's much more debate and defensiveness in our meetings than works for me. And so I'd like to look at how we do discussions in meetings. It just feels kind of male-centric and white-centric, and actually kind of middle-class-centric. So people will come out, and they may not use that language, but they may say, if we could do this a little differently, 6 months, 12 months, maybe even 18 months into a culture change process, more folks will speak up. You'll get those initial folks, the canaries in the coal mines, but other folks are like, I got to feed my family. And so I'm not speaking up until I'm for sure you're serious and you've got skin in the game. So it's a continuous process. And so for you as leaders, workshop facilitators, knowing that at any point people can say it's not enough. And I know I can get complacent and flat-footed and like, oh, wow, I'm doing great work. And this is really, and if I'm not every session I do prepared for, what else could we improve? Then the feedback feels more jarring to me. Whereas if I anticipate it and invite it, then I'm more prepared. And then our engagement might have better solutions. And